Welcome to Healing Through Stories, Beyond Grief and Loss, an entertaining exploration of some of life's most difficult subjects. I'm Tom Cosgrove, the storyteller that created this experience, and I wanted to share an idea about how this performance can be used. When I perform this show live, it has created a safe space where people can and do share their stories. These have been powerful, healing moments. It is my sincere hope that this performance can succeed at generating a similar space in your community. All it takes is a small gathering and a moderator, one who's willing to tell a personal story of loss before inviting others to share their stories. The following video models what this type of moderator interaction could look like. Our moderator, Juneau-based storyteller Pat McClure, shows us one way this scene could play out. My hope is that the combination of watching Healing Through Stories and feeling the immediacy of the moderator's live personal story will create the space for sharing, the very thing that has made the show so rewarding. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to turn this over to someone who's going to lead us in the second portion of this show. Our moderator for this part of the show is Ms. Pat McClure. Thank you.
When Tom first told these stories publicly, I was in the audience. I had driven all the way in from the valley on a school night to listen. I came for two reasons. One, I knew Tom to be a talented teller, and two, the subject matter. I've buried 3 family members, my sister Paula and both my parents. And I've also, in years past, had the privilege of working as a hospice volunteer. That evening of stories, like tonight, was impactful. Dying, death, grieving, they touch us all, and Tom's stories resonated. Now, at first, folks were hesitant to get up and tell, but Tom had succeeded in creating a safe space so people were open to share. And once he invited and someone stepped up, well, then there were more volunteers than there was time. As the moderator this evening, I want to break the ice and begin by telling a story. For the past 25 years, I've been wearing this necklace, which I lovingly refer to as my jewelry of the dead. My mother's wedding ring, engraved with the initials of she and my father, Charlie, and the date they were wed, 28 August, 1937. My mother asked me to take it. She was dying and had lost a lot of weight, and she feared that the ring would slip off unnoticed. I hesitated. I felt that by taking the ring, I would be acknowledging her impending death, and I wasn't ready to accept that. But I reconsidered, and I accepted the gift. I wanted to give her the gift of knowing that this treasured symbol would have safekeeping in the years to come. The exchange was made, and that very simple act was very meaningful and emotional. The initial P was my sister Paula's. She died of Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. After her funeral mass and burial, my 3 remaining sisters and I sat on her bed while her only daughter took out Paula's belongings and dispersed them to us. By default, being the only sibling who shared the initial P, I got the charm. I also got the wool socks because I live in Alaska. The Medal of the Madonna belonged to my dear friend, Carla. who died 10 years ago this month of ovarian cancer. Carla had been one of Aware's Women of Distinction, a well-deserved honor, but it did not touch the surface of the life, the impact that she had in her 50-plus years. Carla was an amazing woman. She was a tireless, passionate, brilliant advocate for the underserved. I think her passion may have come from her Italian upbringing, and her desire to serve social justice may have been influenced by the liberation theology of the church that we were both raised in. I loved Carla as my colleague and as my friend. She learned of her diagnosis when she was back on the East Coast caring for family. When I heard the devastating news, I went into a tailspin. Helpless to help from 4,000 miles away. Cards, letters, phone calls, prayers said, candles lit were not enough. I needed more. It was a summer's day. I was out walking the dog when I saw what I needed to do. A healing quilt had to be made. I couldn't get home fast enough. Phone calls were made. An invitation was put out to friends so that they could compose a block for the quilt. The sewing room was stripped of all other projects. Sewing machines hummed, note the plural. Beautiful blocks were delivered that were lovingly, hopefully sewn. So many, in fact, that 2 quilts were created. And they were hand-delivered to Carla, and she wrapped herself in one while it was still being hand-stitched on the binding. A few months before Carla died, she bravely conducted her Alaskan farewell tour, and she journeyed north to say goodbye to all of us. Her parting gifts of shared memories and smiles and hugs and tears were gifts beyond measure. Carla died on October 5, and on that day, as a friend has written, the landscape of the earth changed. Carla was buried in one of the quilts, and I felt so honored that she and her family felt the quilt worthy to embrace her remains. She was wrapped in the manifestation of all our love and prayers and gratitude for our dear friend and her life well lived. Every morning I get up and I put on my jewelry of the dead. Tokens that represent 3 strong, beautiful, loving women. Women who are ever present in my life and serve to remind me to try to live my best life. Thank you. Listening is an act of love, and it is a crucial component for the healing to occur when stories are shared. You look around, there's a room full of stories here, and you are surrounded by people who are willing to open their hearts and listen. It may not be here and now this evening, but it may be a venue outside of this space at another time. Would anyone like to share a story this evening? Steve, please.
Good evening. Well, the year is 1987. It's midsummer. I'm visiting my family back home on the Jersey Shore. 4th of July weekend's coming up. And as I arrived home, my dad was not feeling well. And I asked him, "How are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I haven't been feeling too good for a couple of weeks. I think I have the flu. I'll be okay. What are you going to do?" Well, the 4th of July comes and goes. And we go off and do a painting project together. And in no time at all, during the middle of that, he ends up on the floor. I come over to him and I ask him how he's doing. And he says, "I'm not feeling too good." I get him off to the doctor, who gets him off to the hospital. I follow behind. And my mom comes in the door to the emergency room, and I see tears coming down my father's face. It's the first time I ever saw him cry, and I'm 31. A few more days go by, he's in the hospital. All kinds of tests, CAT scans, EKGs, blood tests. And then he comes home. Diagnosis is a few lesions in his brain impacted some of his peripheral vision. It'll probably get better. He's going to be okay. So I make plans to go up to my brother's place for a little bit while I'm at home. Sunday rolls around. It's beautiful. Weather's cooled off. We're all sitting out underneath the maple tree that my dad had planted when the house was new and we weren't even born yet. And I can remember him saying, "Oh, that's such a beautiful breeze. It's just beautiful. And now it's time to take a nap. I'm going to go in the house." So he does. 5 minutes later, I end up going in the house to take a shower to get ready to go to my brother's house. And as I get to the foot of the stairs, it opens on my father and my mom's bedroom, and he's standing at the door holding on to his heart, and he's calling for my mom, "Edith, Edith." And there's this shock of terror that ran through me so hard that I was at the top of the steps and going into the shower before I knew it. I just turned and right into flight. A minute later, my sister's rapping at the door. "Steve, there's something wrong with Dad. You need to come down." I come down into the bedroom, and there's my dad staring at the ceiling with my brother right at his head. My brother says, "It came right out of his toes, or shot right up through him." Whew. Well, my EMT kicked on, and I went right into duty mode. Checked for a pulse, checked for breathing, not happening. We get him on the floor, and I start CPR. The first 2 breaths, right? Such an intimacy. My lips on his lips. That breath goes in, that chest rises. All that hope going into my dad's lungs. I begin compressions, right? 1 and 2 and 3. We all know it. More breaths, more compressions. 2 and 3 and 4. I look down along the sides. The blood's pooling up in his veins on the side of his body. And then my cadence changes from 2 and 3 and 4 into "You don't want to come back." I say that a couple of times, not out loud, right? It's not long before the paramedics show up. Then the room fills up with all the personnel and all the equipment, and I vacate the house. And I step outside, and the whole neighborhood's there. We'd done all our lives. Something happens, we go. A couple of people come up to offer me condolences, and I can't even do it. I'm so adrenalized, and all I'm looking for is some other duty to do. Well, off we go to the hospital after they get him in the ambulance. My mom gets in the ambulance. The rest of the family goes up. We're there 20 minutes, and we're in the room when they pronounce him dead. And my dad's eyes are half closed. Man had brilliant blue eyes, and I had no idea. He wore glasses, and he had eyebrows that dwarf mine. And there's a stillness in the room. And I'd never experienced that stillness. I have many times since, but that's the first time. Everybody leaves. I'm the last one. I just put my head down on his chest. I kiss him on the cheek, and I walk out of the door. It took me 5 years to the day to meet and do anything with the emotional energy that got moved that day. And since that time, it's all opening up. I was just thinking what Tom said earlier this evening, right? I found my mortality. I was raised Catholic. I'm always looking for that immortality. I found my mortality. It's just awesome. And along with that comes my vulnerability, my capacity to stay and not have such a need to run so fast or shut down. It's the greatest gift I ever received. Thank you.
Another story, please.
Thank you.
A week before she died, 4 years ago, I told my mother a lie, and that lie still haunts me. Cancer took her down swiftly. 6 months separated diagnosis from death. It was fleeting for us, but it was an eternity for her. For the first few weeks, she hoped for surgery, but there was no window of opportunity in the New York City hospital with which her doctor was affiliated. She was frustrated, but she understood. It was for the young and the vital. For the elderly, it's space available. So she was a deeply religious Catholic, and so was I when I was young. I enjoyed sharing my mother's faith. We talked of the lives of the saints, my aspirations for priesthood. We talked of heaven and one day joining Jesus and the saints and our loved ones. But then the mind-altering chemistry of puberty hit, and I emerged from that tumultuous time after grappling with difficult questions, still devout, but now a devout atheist. It was a bitter pill for my mother. I visited her just twice during the time of her cancer. The first time, she was still Mom, lucid, sitting in her favorite chair with a stack of books by her side. But now her hands frequently massaged her abdomen where she could feel the cancer spreading. We talked of many things. We talked about her frustration with the medical system. We talked of her sister, who had died of the same form of cancer just 2 years earlier. But mostly she worried about my father. How would he get by without her? She was the planner. She intended to die last, and it wasn't working out that way. But I should get back to the lie. Now, the lie was not the first lie I told her by any means. The first that I remember was when I was about 4, and my little sister ran and told our mother that I had pissed on the daffodils growing in the garden. I denied it, but my mother wasn't fooled, because my little sister was perfect and would never have lied. The second visit was much different. She was now bedridden. A hospice nurse came every day, and her pain was ameliorated by morphine. She hated the morphine as much as she needed it. Her mind had been so sharp, critical thinking was second nature for her, and now she dwelled in the fog of morphine. Fortunately, she slept most of the time. So during that visit, I cooked for my father and mother, but mostly I just sat in a chair by her bed and watched her sleeping. And when she'd awaken, she'd look over at me and command, "Robbie, go out and play," or ask, "What are you doing here?" 2 or 3 times, she looked at me and said, "It's a long, hard road to heaven." And I smiled and nodded. But the lie. It was the day before I had to return to Juneau. I was sitting, as I usually did, by her bed, and she sat up, or half sat up, pushing off her pillow, and looked at me and said, "What if there is no heaven?" And I looked back at her and said, "Of course there's a heaven. You know that, Mom." She gave me her mother look, probing, deep, disappointed, and sank back into her pillows and her slumber. So what do you tell your dying mother? To this day, I don't know how to answer her question, but I do know I got it wrong that day.
We have run out of time for our television audience, but I thank you all for attending. You've been watching Healing Through Stories Beyond Grief and Loss with storyteller Tom Cosgrove. I'm Pat McClure. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.